In obstructive lung diseases like asthma, where individuals suffer from reversible narrowing of the airways, medications like bronchodilators are helpful in keeping the airways open. Now, based on their mechanism of action, bronchodilators can be broadly divided into four main groups: beta-2 agonists, muscarinic antagonists, leukotrienes antagonists, and methylxanthines. In this video,
Yo. I don't know if you hear me. Can you hear me? Okay, Mike. Yo, what's up, Nate? Oh, do I have freaking... What am I doing? What is life? What's going on here? Technical difficulties as usual, but we got it. Oh crap. I need to log in to freaking enjoy this thing. Medical school and cardiopulmonar. Okay, there we go.
in obstructive lung diseases like asthma, where individuals suffer from reversible narrowing of the airways, medications like bronchodilators are helpful in keeping the airways open. Now, based on their mechanism of action, bronchodilators can be broadly divided into four main groups: beta-2 agonists, muscarinic antagonists, leukotrienes antagonists, and methylxanthines. In this video, we'll focus on the bronchodilators like beta-2 agonists and muscarinic antagonists, which mimic or inhibit the regulatory effects of the autonomic nervous system on bronchial smooth muscle. Okay, so let's take a look at the lungs. You've got the trachea, which branches off into the right and left bronchi, and then continues to branch into thousands of bronchioles. In the bronchioles, you've got the lumen, the mucosa, which includes the inner lining of epithelial cells, as well as the lamina propria, which contains many cells like the type 2 helper cells, B cells, and mast cells. Surrounding the lamina propria, there's a layer of smooth muscles and submucosa. These muscles are innervated by the nerves of the autonomic nervous system, which means they can't be controlled consciously. The autonomic nervous system is made up of the sympathetic nervous system, which is involved in the flight or fight response, like running away from angry raccoons, and parasympathetic system, which is involved in the rest and digest response, like taking a nap after a big dinner. So let's say that raccoons are chasing you. The sympathetic nerves activate and release norepinephrine, which bind to beta-2 adrenergic receptors on the smooth muscles in the respiratory tract, causing them to relax. The diameter of the airways increases, and more oxygen gets to the lungs. When you're resting, there's less need for the extra oxygen, so the parasympathetic nerves release acetylcholine, which bind to muscarinic M3 receptors in the respiratory tract, causing smooth muscle contraction and narrowing the airways. Now, in conditions like asthma and chronic obstructive lung disease, such as emphysema and chronic bronchitis, the respiratory airways become narrower, which obstructs airflow, leading to wheezing, shortness of breath, and chest tightness. Now, the main difference between asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, or COPD, is that in asthma, the airway narrowing is due to muscle spasms, which is reversible, while in COPD, it's due to chronic inflammatory damage to the airways, which is irreversible. Now, for asthma, we can use beta-2 agonists to relax the smooth muscles, or muscarinic antagonists to prevent muscle contraction. Now, although the airway obstruction in COPD is irreversible, bronchodilators can often present the complete closure of the airway during expiration, which provides mild symptomatic relief. Let's start with the beta-2 agonists first, which are also known as beta-2 receptor agonists. These medications come in an aerosolized form and are taken via inhalers. Once in the lungs, they bind to the beta-2 adrenergic receptors on bronchial smooth muscle cells. This activates the enzyme adenylyl cyclase, which leads to increased cyclic AMP production that ultimately cause relaxation of the smooth muscle. The effect is both fast and localized within the lungs, which makes these medications a treatment of choice for quick symptom relief with minimal side effects. Beta-2 agonists also stimulate the beta-2 receptors on immune cells like mast cells and decrease the release of inflammatory mediators like leukotrienes and prostaglandins. This in turn decreases the inflammation, swelling, and irritation in the respiratory tract. Ultimately, all these events help dilate the narrow airways and improve airflow. Now, based on the duration of action, inhaled beta-2 agonists can be divided into two broad groups: short-acting beta-2 agonists, or SABA, and long-acting beta-2 agonists, or LABA. SABAs include medication like albuterol, metoprolol, and terbutaline. Inhaled albuterol, taken from a pressurized meter-dose inhaler, or PMDI, produces bronchodilation within 5 minutes and lasts for a period of 2 to 4 hours. It's best used to terminate acute asthma attacks, but less useful for prophylaxis. They're also the medication of choice for exercise-induced bronchospasm, a condition where exercises can trigger asthma attacks. Side effects of SABAs are caused by increased sympathetic stimulation and include tachycardia, palpitation, muscle tremors, restlessness, and insomnia. Long-acting beta-2 agonists, or LABAs, include medications like salmeterol and formoterol. Compared to the SABAs, these beta-2 agonists have a slow onset of action, which is why they're not used for symptomatic relief during acute asthma attacks. But, because of their long duration of action, which lasts for over 12 hours, inhaled LABAs are used as a twice-a-day prophylactic or maintenance therapy for asthma and COPD. Side effects of LABAs are similar to the side effects of SABAs, but sometimes they can get exaggerated because of their longer duration of action. For example, LABAs can turn tachycardias into arrhythmias, which could result in heart failure and death. That's why LABAs are rarely used as monotherapy. Instead, in severe asthma, LABAs are added when the symptoms aren't well controlled by inhaled corticosteroid alone. This combination reduces the dosage needed for both medications, and subsequently their systemic side effects. Alright, now let's move on to the muscarinic antagonists, also known as muscarinic receptor antagonists. These medications are also given via inhalers, where they enter the lungs and bind to M3 muscarinic receptors on the tracheal and bronchial smooth muscles. This blocks acetylcholine from binding to the receptors, leading to less smooth muscle constriction. Now, ipratropium bromide and tiotropium bromide are the most commonly used muscarinic antagonists for asthma and COPD. Ipratropium bromide is short-acting, with a duration of 4 to 6 hours, while tiotropium bromide is long-acting, with a duration of 24 hours. In comparison to the beta-2 agonists, these medications are less effective for asthma, but more effective for COPD, where they are the bronchodilators of choice. However, for severe asthma and COPD, muscarinic antagonists are often given with LABAs, because this combination produces an additive effect, leading to stronger and longer-lasting bronchodilation. Side effects of muscarinic antagonists include tachycardia, dry mouth, restlessness, pupil dilation, and they're contraindicated in individuals suffering from narrow-angle glaucoma, since they relax the ciliary muscles, which worsens the obstruction of aqueous humor drainage. So now we want to make a simple and fun mnemonic that will help you memorize and retain all of these pharmacology facts. Let's have a two-headed B for the beta-2 agonists, and a three-armed musketeer carrying a shield in each arm to represent the muscarinic antagonists that block the M3 receptors. The B is relaxing with a tall friend and a short friend, which represents LABAs and SABAs. His short friend is Albert Einstein, which stands for albuterol, He's very self-conscious about his height, so he's wearing a turban on his head for terbutaline, and on top of that is a metal helmet for metaproterenol. Next to him is a wheezing jogger to help you remember that SABAs are used for symptomatic relief during acute asthma attacks and exercise-induced asthma. Next are the labas, and there's a very long salmon for salmeterol, wearing formal wear for formoterol. For indications, let's have a cop for COPD and a no smoking sign for asthma prophylaxis. For side effects of beta-2 agonists, there's the angry raccoon to represent sympathetic response. He's sitting up in bed because he's too angry to sleep, and his little heart is about to pop out of his chest. Next are the muscarinic antagonists, which will be represented by 2 tropical palm trees by the musketeer, since they have tropium in their name. The shorter tree has a rat in it for the shorter-acting ipratropium, while the longer tree has ties hanging off of it for the long-acting tiotropium. Since they're more effective for COPD and less effective for asthma, let's have a very buff cop holding a tiny no-smoking sign. For side effects, let's have a girl who's in love with the musketeer. Her heart's beating faster, she's got dry mouth, and her pupils are dilated. In fact, her eyes are almost popping out of her head, which represents the contraindication for people with glaucoma. Alright, as a quick recap, treatment of obstructive lung diseases like asthma or COPD includes bronchodilators that cause smooth muscle relaxation and dilation of the bronchi. This can be done by stimulating the beta-2 receptors with beta-2 agonists, or it can be done by inhibiting the muscarinic M3 receptor with the muscarinic antagonists. Short-acting beta-2 agonists like albuterol are useful in treating acute asthma attacks and exercise-induced asthma, while long-acting beta-2 agonists and muscarinic antagonists are effective in prophylactic therapy for severe asthma and COPD. But wait, there's more! Here's a mind map with all of the mnemonics from the video. Go ahead and pause so you can test yourself to see what you remember. Stay tuned for the answers after the credits.
In obstructive lung diseases like asthma, individuals suffer from reversible narrowing of the airways. However, medications like bronchodilators are helpful in keeping the airways open. Now, based on their mechanism of action, bronchodilators can be broadly divided into 4 main groups: beta-2 agonists, muscarinic antagonists, leukotriene antagonists, and methylxanthines. For this video, we'll just focus on leukotriene modifying agents and methylxanthines. So, if we take a look at the lungs, you've got the trachea, which branches off into right and left bronchi, and then continues to branch into thousands of bronchioles. In the bronchioles, you've got the lumen, the mucosa, which includes the inner lining of epithelial cells, as well as the lamina propria, which contains many cells like the type 2 helper T cells, B cells, and mast cells. Surrounding the lamina propria, there's a layer of smooth muscles and submucosa. This submucosal layer contains mucus-secreting glands and blood vessels. Now, the molecular pathway that leads to asthma is actually pretty complex, but it's often initiated by an environmental trigger. Allergens from environmental triggers like air pollutants or cigarette smoke are picked up by dendritic cells, which present them to a type 2 helper T cell, or Th2 cell in the lamina propria. These cells then produce cytokines like IL-4 and IL-5, which causes the inflammatory response. IL-4 is especially important because it leads to the production of IgE antibodies by B cells, and these antibodies bind to Fc-epsilon-R1 receptors on mast cells to activate them. These mast cells use an enzyme called phospholipase A2 to take membrane phospholipids and make a 20-carbon polyunsaturated fatty acid called arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is then metabolized by 2 important enzymes. One is cyclooxygenase 2, or COX-2, which makes prostaglandins. Another one is 5-lipoxygenase, or 5-LOX, which makes leukotrienes. Now, IL-5, on the other hand, activates eosinophils, which promote an immune response by releasing more cytokines and leukotrienes. Leukotrienes bind with the leukotriene receptors on the bronchial smooth muscles and cause them to contract. They also bind to receptors on the mucus glands to increase mucus secretion. Similarly, prostaglandins also bind to the receptors in smooth muscles and mucus glands to cause a similar effect. These mediators also increase the vascular permeability in the airways and attract more immune cells to the area. The combination of inflammation and bronchospasm causes obstruction of the airway, which leads to symptoms like coughing, chest tightness, dyspnea, or difficulty breathing, and wheezing, which is a high-pitched whistling sound during exhalation. Chronic inflammation also makes the respiratory tract more sensitive to allergens, so these symptoms become easier to trigger. In this video, we're focusing on the management of smooth muscle spasms, as relieving the spasms will help in opening up the narrowed airways. Now, to do that, the role of bronchodilators like leukotriene modifying agents and methylxanthines is very important. Let's start with the leukotriene modifying agents. These medications can be divided into two broad groups. One is leukotriene receptor antagonists, also known as cysteinoleukotriene receptor antagonists. The other group is leukotriene synthesis inhibitors, which are also known as 5-lipoxygenase inhibitors. Leukotriene receptor antagonists like montelukast and zafirlukast are peroral medications that bind to the leukotriene receptors in the smooth muscles of the respiratory airways and prevent leukotriene from binding. This weakens smooth muscle contraction in the respiratory tract, decreases mucus secretion, and reduces inflammation. Since they're taken per oral, they have a slower onset of action compared to inhaled bronchodilators, like albuterol, which is why they're used for asthma prophylaxis and not during an acute asthma attack. They are especially effective in preventing exercise or aspirin-induced asthma. Since leukotriene receptor antagonists have mild, nonspecific side effects like headache and rash, they're given in combination with other asthma medications like corticosteroids, which can cause immunosuppression, and long-acting beta agonists, which can cause arrhythmias. This will lower the necessary dose of these more dangerous medications, which makes montelukast and zafirlukast great supportive medications. Next, let's move on to the leukotriene synthesis inhibitors, like Xylutin, which is also per oral. After absorption, it enters immune cells like mast cells and inhibits the enzyme 5-lipoxygenase, which stops the synthesis of leukotriene from arachidonic acid. Just like leukotriene receptor antagonists, they're also used for asthma prophylaxis and are effective in preventing exercise or aspirin-induced asthma. However, they are hepatotoxic, so they're used less frequently. Okay, moving on. The next group of bronchodilators are the methylxanthines. Caffeine actually belongs to this family of compounds. But for asthma treatment, the most common medication is theophylline, also known as 1,3-dimethylxanthine. This medication is taken per oral and can enter the smooth muscles in the respiratory tract. Once there, theophylline inhibits the enzyme phosphodiesterase, or PDE, which converts CAMP into an inactive form, called 5-AMP. This increases the level of CAMP within the cell, and triggers smooth muscle relaxation. Besides its use in asthma, theophylline is also used as a bronchodilator in COPD. Just like coffee, theophylline also blocks adenosine receptors throughout the body. Adenosine is a mediator that causes vasodilation, decreased heart rate, and neurotransmitter release in the brain, but increased smooth muscle contraction in the respiratory tract. This mechanism could also explain some of theophyline's bronchodilating effect. However, theophylline has a very narrow therapeutic index of 5 to 15 micrograms per milliliter, so it's very easy to overdose. This could cause insomnia, nausea, and vomiting, but the most dangerous side effects include overstimulation of the central nervous system and cardiovascular system. leading to seizure and arrhythmia. Since methylxanthines are metabolized by a class of liver enzymes called cytochrome P450, medications that inhibit these enzymes, like fluoxetine or ciprofloxacin, should be avoided. Due to the dangerous side effects, theophylline is now rarely used. Now, we want to make a simple and fun mnemonic that'll help you efficiently memorize and retain all these pharmacology facts. So, for the leukotriene modifying agents, let's use a white train. Now, the train stop represents the target receptor, so we'll put the leukotriene receptor antagonists here. Since they have leucist in their name, let's put a four-leaf clover here for monteleucist and zifirlocast. Hopefully, they'll make our luck last. Now, the back of the train is still under construction, so let's use it to represent leukotriene synthesis inhibitors. This will be an army lieutenant named Z for Xylutin, and he's holding a big, rotting liver to represent hepatotoxicity. Now, let's have a track and field athlete, which represents exercise-induced asthma, trying to jump over the train with giant springs on his shoes, which represents aspirin-induced asthma. This will help you remember leukotriene-modifying agents are effective against both. Now, methylxanthine will be represented by a big mug of coffee. Bathing inside the coffee mug is the main drug of the group, theophylline, which is represented by Socrates, the father of Western philosophy. Since theophylline is effective in treating COPD, let's put an angry police officer next to the mug who's about to arrest him for public indecency. There are measurement lines that max out at 15 on the side of the coffee mug to represent the low therapeutic window. But this mug is way overfilled. All this coffee is too much for Socrates to handle, so he's vomiting into the cup. A human heart and brain is also floating inside to help you remember the cardio and neurotoxicity. Finally, a chrome-colored cell is climbing over the side of the mug, trying to get a sip of coffee, because methylxanthines are metabolized by cytochrome P450. Alright, as a quick recap, treatment of obstructive lung diseases like asthma include bronchodilators, which relax the smooth muscle in the respiratory tract and dilate the airway. Leukotriene is an inflammatory mediator that causes smooth muscle contraction, so leukotriene modifying agents like Xylutin, which decrease its synthesis, or monteleucist and zifirlocast, which blocks its receptor, are all effective prophylactic medications that result in smooth muscle relaxation. So, smooth muscle relaxation can be achieved in three ways. First is by inhibiting the leukotriene receptors present on smooth muscles. Secondly, by inhibiting the synthesis of leukotrienes. And lastly, by increasing the CAMP level in smooth muscle cells and by inhibiting the adenosine receptor on smooth muscles. Leukotriene receptor antagonists like monteleucist and zifirlocast inhibit the leukotriene receptors. Xylutin inhibits the synthesis by inhibiting the 5-lipoxygenase enzyme, and methylxanthines like theophylline increase the CAMP level and inhibit the adenosine receptors. Ultimately, all these actions lead to bronchodilation, which helps in dilating the airways in diseases like asthma. Theophylline is also used to treat COPD, but leukotriene antagonists are of no use in COPD. But wait, there's more. Here's a mind map with all of the mnemonics from the video. Go ahead and pause so you can test yourself and see what you remember. Stay tuned for the answers after the credits.
Yo, I'm just listening to some osmosis videos because I have to do some stuff for, oh dang, 2.5 hours, dang. I have to do some stuff for class, so just like medical school stuff. Renal system blockade. Oh man, it's a lot.
The workhorses of the urinary system are the kidneys, which are the twin bean-shaped organs in your body that clear harmful substances by filtering your blood. They're like a water purification plant that helps clean the drinking water for a city. They also regulate blood pH, volume, pressure, osmolality, as well as produce hormones. The kidneys are located between the T12 and L3 vertebrae, and they're partially protected by ribs 11 and 12, which are the floating ribs. The kidneys are roughly the size of a fist and are retroperitoneal, meaning they sit behind the peritoneal membrane, alongside the vertebral column. The right kidney is pushed down by the liver, so it sits slightly lower than the left kidney. In the middle of each kidney, there's an indentation that forms the renal hilum. This is the entry and exit point for the ureter, renal artery and renal vein, lymphatics, and nerves going into and coming out of the kidney. The kidney is surrounded by 3 layers of tissue. On the outside is the renal fascia, which is a thin layer of dense connective tissue that anchors the kidney to its surroundings. The middle layer, or adipose capsule, is a fatty layer that protects the kidney from trauma. And the deepest layer, called the renal capsule, is a smooth, transparent sheet of dense connective tissue that gives the kidney its distinctive shape. If you take a cross-section of the kidney, there are 2 main parts. The inner portion is the renal medulla, and the outside rim is the renal cortex. The medulla is made up of 10 to 18 renal pyramids, with the base of the pyramids facing the renal cortex and the tips of the pyramid, called renal papilla, or nipples, pointing toward the center of the kidney. The renal papilla project into minor calyces, which join together to form major calyces, which funnel into the renal pelvis. Urine collects in the renal pelvis and then heads out of the kidney through the ureter. The renal cortex can be divided into an outer cortical zone and an inner juxtamedullary zone. There are also sections of the cortex called renal columns, which extend down into the medulla, separating the renal pyramids from each other. Each renal pyramid and the renal cortex above it is called a renal lobe. So an adult's kidneys filter about 150 liters of blood every day. If we assume that there are 5 liters of blood in the body, that means that the entire blood volume gets filtered about 30 times a day, which is more than once every hour. Because of this, the kidneys get about a quarter of the cardiac output, which is blood getting pumped out of the left ventricle. To reach the kidneys, blood flows from the aorta into the left and right renal arteries. As these renal arteries enter the kidney, they divide into segmental arteries, and then into interlobar arteries, which pass through the renal columns, then to arcuate arteries that go over the bases of the renal pyramids, and then into the cortical radiate arteries, which supply the cortex. The cortical radiate arteries continue to divide, eventually forming afferent arterioles that split into a tiny bundle of capillaries called the glomerulus. And the glomerulus is the site where blood filtration starts. Interestingly, once the blood leaves these glomeruli, it doesn't enter the venules. Instead, the glomerulus funnels blood into efferent arterioles, which divide into capillaries a second time. These paratubular capillaries then reunite to become the cortical radiate veins, then the arcuate veins, then interlobar veins, and then finally into the left and right renal veins, which connect to the inferior vena cava. The flow of the veins are similar to the arteries, but in reverse. The only difference is that there's a segmental artery, but no segmental vein. Within each kidney, there are about 1 million nephrons, and each nephron is made up of a renal corpuscle and a renal tubule. The renal corpuscle is where blood filtration starts, and it includes the glomerulus, which is the tiny bed of capillaries, and the Bowman's capsule, which is made of renal cells that surround the glomerulus. As blood flows into the glomerulus, water and some solutes in the blood, like sodium, are able to pass through the endothelial lining of the capillary, move across its basement membrane, through the epithelial lining of the nephron, and finally into the Bowman space of the nephron itself, at which point it's called filtrate. The epithelium of the nephron is made of specialized cells called podocytes, which wrap around the basement membrane like the tentacles of an octopus. Between these tentacle-like projections are tiny gaps called filtration slits that act like a sieve, allowing only small particles like water, glucose, and ionic salts to pass through, while blocking large proteins and red blood cells. As the filtrate leaves the Bowman's capsule, it flows into the renal tubule, which is surrounded by the paratubular capillaries. Now, before we dive too far in here, let's redraw the nephron so that the structure of the renal tubule is a little more accurate. Alright, so the renal tubule itself can be divided into the proximal convoluted tubule, the nephron loop, also known as the loop of Henle, which is made up of a descending limb and the ascending limb, the distal convoluted tubule, and finally the collection ducts, which ultimately send the urine to the minor calyces. Here the filtrate becomes fine-tuned, based on what the body wants to keep versus what it wants to discard, with water and solutes getting passed back and forth between the filtrate and the lumen of the renal tubule and the blood in the peritubular capillaries. Each nephron also has a really unique region called the juxtaglomerular complex, which is involved in the regulation of blood pressure and the glomerular filtration rate, or the amount of blood that passes through the glomeruli each minute. The juxtaglomerular complex is located between the distal convoluted tubule and the afferent arteriole. There are 3 types of cells in the juxtaglomerular complex: macula densa cells, juxtaglomerular cells, and extraglomerular mesangial cells. Macula densa cells are located in the distal convoluted tubule, and they can sense when levels of sodium and chloride are low. So in the case of hypovolemia and hypotension, the macula densa cells sense the low sodium and chloride levels and send a signal over to the juxtaglomerular cells, which are located in the wall of the afferent arteriole. The extraglomerular mesangial cells help with the signaling between macula densa cells and juxtaglomerular cells. The juxtaglomerular cells then receive the signal, and also independently sense the low pressure in the blood vessels, and secrete an enzyme called renin, which increases sodium reabsorption, and this helps raise the blood volume. Renin also causes constriction of blood vessels, which helps raise the blood pressure. Once millions of nephrons have each made urine, it flows into the minor calyces, then major calyces, and finally into the renal pelvis. From there it goes down the ureter, which has a muscular lining which helps push the urine along. The ureters insert into the bladder at the ureterovesical junction, at a sideways angle so that when the bladder becomes full, it compresses the openings to the ureters and prevents backflow of urine. It's basically a one-way valve that prevents urine from refluxing backwards from the bladder into the ureters. The bladder itself is like a balloon. Its muscular wall has tons of folds, called rugae, that can contract when the bladder is emptied of urine and can expand when it's filled with urine. In the layers of the bladder wall are a mucosa layer that has a transitional epithelium, which is stretchy and allows the bladder to distend while maintaining a barrier between urine and the body. In addition, there's a thick muscular layer called the detrusor muscle that helps with bladder contraction during urination, and it has a fibrous adventitia outer layer. In women, the bladder is in front of the vagina, uterus, and rectum, and in men, the bladder is just in front of the rectum. On average, the bladder can hold around 750 milliliters of urine, or about the volume of a bottle of wine.
Man,
Slightly
it's
less
going.
common, though,
I
because of
am
problems
just,
from the uterus.
trying
That's
to
especially true during pregnancy.
finish up some books and do all that stuff, and
Or the
then
bladder has a smooth triangular
eventually,
region called the trigone region, with 2 corners at the ureterovesical junctions.
yeah,
and the third corner
just
is
staying
the
alive,
internal
staying alive,
trigone
and
orifice,
trying to be
where the
creative
bladder
and
meets the urethra.
get through medical school and all
The
that.
trigone
So
region is very sensitive
you
to
know, it's
expansion.
it's
And once it stretches
life
to a
is good.
certain
Life
point,
is
the
good.
bladder
Stressful,
sends a
but
signal
good.
to the brain. That it's time to pee. The urethra is a thin muscular tube that drains urine from the bladder. Starting
I
from
will
the
say that
internal
medical school is
urethral orifice to
definitely
the external opening.
In
males, the urethra
it's a
first
tough
passes
one.
through the prostate, where it's called the prostatic urethra, and then it passes through deep muscles of the peritoneum, where it's called the intermediate
But
urethra.
I'm
And
finding
finally
I'm
passes
finding
through
balance.
the
I'm
penis,
finding
where it's called the spongy urethra.
what I enjoy.
The male urethra is also
All
used during
those
ejaculation.
sort of
Except there,
things.
semen enters into the urethra
Dang.
via the ejaculatory
Jesus.
ducts. In women, the urethra runs through the perineal floor of the pelvis and exits between the 2 labia
listening to
minora,
urethras.
above the vaginal opening and below the clitoris in an area called the vulval vestibule. In
Medical
men and
school.
women, around the
Never
internal
know what you're
urethral
gonna
orifice,
get.
the detrusor muscle thickens to form the internal sphincter. This involuntary sphincter is controlled by the autonomic nervous system and keeps the urethra closed when the bladder isn't full. Additionally, there's an external sphincter at the level of the urogenital diaphragm in the floor of the pelvis, which is under voluntary control. By contracting the skeletal muscles around the external sphincter, urination can be stopped voluntarily. This is called a Kegel exercise, and it can be done to strengthen the pelvic floor. The act of urination involves close coordination between the nervous system and the muscles of the bladder. Once the volume of the bladder is greater than about 300 to 400 milliliters, basically when it's half full, pressure on the bladder walls increases, and that sends signals to the urination or micturition center in the spinal cord, located at S2 and S3. This sets off a reflex arc called the micturition reflex, which causes contraction of the bladder and relaxation of the internal.
Oh, thanks.
sphincter
I'm
and
glad you
external
like the glad you like the AR courses and stuff.
Now, the pontine storage center and the
You know, I just sort of do those in my
center
spare
are two
time
areas in the
when I
pons part
can.
of your brain that
I'm a
help
certified
control
instructor,
urination.
so I kind of do those to
When you
like
can't
keep
find a
my
toilet and want to hold
certification.
your urine,
But
then you activate the pontine storage center, and that stops.
you know, like the big thing about it is just really just one, being able to be creative, share the work that I've done, and show people that it just doesn't really, you know, it doesn't take a lot to create projects like that. It just takes a, you know, proper direction, and you know, hopefully I can help people navigate the space like I've been able to navigate, and be able to create some awesome stuff. You know, and you know, it's fun that like, you know, Unity notices it, and you know, they sort of promote it and they keep tabs on it and stuff like that. So it's really great. But you know, honestly, you know, like I'm tired all the time, and I'm always trying to like figure out how to like what balance looks like. To be honest with you, like it's, you know, yesterday I you know, was trying to study and trying to do some stuff, but like I was just super tired, so I like dozed off at like, you know, like 8 o'clock. I woke up like in a panic at like 1 and was like, ah, crap, you know, like I didn't do the things that I was supposed to do, you know, and so then I just, you know, I just try to, you know, I have a Rocket book. I use a lot of planners and stuff like that, so that's helpful. But you know, it's always tough. It's always tough. So you know, whenever I figure it out, I'll let you know. You know how to balance things, but it's really just time management for me. You know, the better I could manage my time, the more things get done, and then you know, you just sort of go from there. You know, I have things on my list that I try to do, whether it's you know, doing push-ups and working out, or you know, working on a page of a comic a day, or all these different things. I just try to get the little things done, and as much, you know, as swiftly and as easily as possible, and then you know, sort of see where that takes me. So you know, just time management. You know, this kind of stuff that like I was doing when I was playing football still, where it's just, you know, I need to do the creative stuff to sort of keep myself sane. I need to study to stay in medical school and become a physician. I need to, you know, like do social media stuff and all that because, you know, I operate a studio and I want people to buy books and all that stuff so that I could generate enough money to pay for all the medical school stuff, right? And all my student loans and all that. And so it's a, you know, it's just like everything else. It's just like every job or whatever. It's just, you know, you just gotta just stick to the plan and then, you know, be as disciplined as possible. And I don't think that I'm as disciplined as I would like to be, but you know, I try, and I think that comes across in sort of the things that I put out and the things that I do and the results that I get is that I just try. You know, just try to just do the little things every day. Not successful all the time. I will say that, and it does get kind of frustrating and overwhelming. But you know, what can I do? Like you know, pay my bills, go to school, pay my tuition, work on stuff from time to time, collaborate with people from time to time, and then just kind of just go from there. So. You know, it's I'm learning what it takes, learning how all this stuff works. But you know, as you can see, I'm like trying to like do some school stuff while I'm like working on a page because That, you know, you just can't really do everything. You have to find ways to like double dip. And I think that's it's an acquired taste. It's working. It's kind of getting there. So we'll see. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm pleased with how things are coming along with especially this book and, you know, the work that I'm able to do. So, you know, I just kind of just go from there, you know. But yeah, if there's any specific sort of like AR stuff or like courses or whatever that like you, or things you from my work that you want me to like sort of explore or go over, I would love to, you know, make a video about it and stuff like that. I'm kind of just spitballing at this point and just seeing what people enjoy and then kind of going from there. And if you haven't already, you know, you could check out my I'm having a holiday sale, and so go ahead and snag some stuff from the Iltopia website at shop.iltopia.com. That's sort of you know, the other thing that I gotta do is I gotta make sales so I can pay bills. But yeah, you know. Oops. I will say that this is not. I'm just trying to get these things done.
When you finally do find that toilet and you're ready to urinate, the pontine micturition center is active, and it allows the micturition reflex to happen, and you can finally pee. Alright, as a quick recap, the kidney's main function is to filter all of the body's blood about 30 times a day, and to produce urine. The urine passes down through the ureters and into the bladder. As the urine collects in the bladder, it increases the pressure on the bladder wall and the micturition reflex is triggered. This allows the urine to flow through the urethra and out the body.
Renal clearance. Here we go.
In order for the body to function properly, it needs a way to get rid of toxins and other waste materials. That's where the kidneys come in. Their main function is to filter the blood and remove any unwanted substances from the body. Now, the first step in blood filtration happens at the glomerulus, a tiny bed of capillaries surrounded by the Bowman's capsule. The glomerular filtration barrier is made up of 3 layers, and together they separate the blood inside the glomerular capillaries from the fluid inside the Bowman's capsule. They work like a sieve, allowing water and some solutes in the plasma, like sodium, to pass into Bowman's space.
Yeah,
while keeping negatively charged particles, like
you're fortunate to have sort of found it in school. I just sort of found it in passing and, you know, really just dove deep into it. And so, you know, I like to approach it as a, you know, as a content creator, artist rather than like a developer. You know, developing is cool, but like really the power is from like creating artistic expression, right? And so, yeah, you know, I just encourage you to continue, you know, testing the possibilities of it, because it can take you pretty far as, you know, you progress and find your voice.
Renal clearance means that it will be quickly removed from the blood and vice versa. There's a formula to calculate renal clearance for some substance, let's call it X. In this formula, C stands for the renal clearance, which is the volume of blood plasma that's cleared of the substance over time in minutes. C equals the concentration of the substance in urine, U, multiplied by the urine flow rate, V dot, which is the amount of urine excreted over time in minutes. All of that's divided by the plasma concentration of the substance, P. So, if the urine concentration is high, but the plasma concentration is low,
Oh yeah, I could only imagine.
Was removed
You
from
know,
the blood,
that's
leading to a high renal clearance. As a general rule, small uncharged substances like inulin, which is a small inert polysaccharide molecule,
yeah,
have a relatively
it's slim
easy
pickings. I
time
will say
passing
that
through
it is
glomerulus.
slim pickings. You know,
As an
and
example, let's say that
but
in
you
a
know,
24-hour
it's like
period,
the more
a
you
man
progress,
has
the
2
more you
years
get
of
better
urine,
at it, the
and
more
his
you'll stand
plasma
out, and the
sodium
more you'll find a
concentration
community.
is
You know,
145 milliequivalents
because
per
I,
liter,
you
whereas
know,
his urine
sort of
sodium concentration is
my reputation sort of
190
precedes me at this
milliequivalents per
point where, you know, I just sort of
Using
stood the
this
test of
information,
time.
let's calculate his renal
And
clearance for sodium.
as you get more
First,
opportunities
we
to
need
create
calculate his
projects, you
urine
get
flow
more
rate,
opportunities
which is the urine
to
volume
meet
divided by
people
time.
that
So
are
that's
interested in
2,000
those
milliliters
projects.
divided by
And so as long as you just keep going,
1,440
you know,
minutes,
it's
which
not the
equals
easiest route in the world, but like as long as you keep
1.39
going,
milliliters per minute.
you know, like something good
Since
happens,
urine
and
concentration is
you just at some point
190
you'll just be
milliequivalents per
surprised at
liter,
like
we
what,
multiply that by
you know, what can come from you
1.39
just like sharing
milliliters
your
per
work
minute,
and putting out your
divide
ideas.
by the plasma concentration,
And the fact that, yeah,
which is
there's not a lot of black
145
people.
milliequivalents
It's
per
a
liter.
like, you know,
This
the little
equals
things that you do will stand out.
1.82
And that's been a
milliliters per
blessing
minute.
too.
So that means that 1.82 milliliters of plasma is cleared of sodium per minute. So we know how much plasma is cleared of sodium per minute by the kidneys, but we don't know if any of the sodium is being reabsorbed or secreted into urine by the nephrons. This is because clearance is the sum of all of the reabsorption and secretion that occurs for a substance. And in order to tease out exactly how much reabsorption and secretion is occurring, we need to compare it to inulin. Inulin is a polysaccharide that is produced by plants. It is the one substance that's freely filtered and not actively secreted or reabsorbed. We know this because the filtered fraction, which is how much fluid is reaching the kidneys and passes into the renal tubules, is the same for inulin as it is for plasma. So we can use it to get an accurate estimation of how much fluid is filtered from the renal glomerular capillaries into the filtrate, also known as the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. When we compare the clearance of substance X to inulin, we get something called the clearance ratio. This can be calculated simply as the clearance of substance X divided by the clearance of inulin. If the ratio is equal to 1, then substance X is the same as inulin, and must also be freely filtered and not actively secreted. If the ratio is greater than 1, the clearance of substance X must be greater than inulin, and that means that it must be freely filtered and also actively secreted by the kidneys. If the ratio is less than 1, the clearance of substance X must be less than inulin, and that means that it must not be freely filtered, like with albumin, or it may be freely filtered, but then some of it may be getting reabsorbed by the kidney, like with glucose. So let's continue with that earlier scenario, and assume that we gave that patient an infusion of inulin over 2 hours. Let's suppose the urine concentration of inulin is 140 milligrams per milliliter, and that the plasma concentration of inulin is 1 milligram per milliliter. We can use the same urine flow rate as before, which was 1.39 milliliters per minute. Since urine concentration is 140 milligrams per milliliter, we multiply that by 1.39 milliliters per minute and divide by the plasma concentration, which is 1 milligram per milliliter. This equals 194.6 milliliters per minute. So that means that 194.6 milliliters of plasma is cleared of inulin per minute. Now we can calculate the clearance ratio for sodium, which is 1.82 milliliters per minute divided by 194.6 milliliters per minute, which equals 0.009. 0.009 is far less than 1. So that tells us that very little sodium is excreted in the urine.
I made
Interestingly,
an AR,
since sodium is freely filtered,
like each one of the
it
covers
must
is an AR cover.
reabsorbed by the nephron to have such a low clearance.
Essentially the plan is like by February, there's going to be a total of like 2 hours worth of AR stuff, right? So, you know, it's as a solo developer, it's sort of tough to get all your ideas out all at once. And so, yeah, like I will say I have about like a couple of books, AR, like
water
fully
is filtered
AR
into the
books,
bone in space.
and then I have like, you know,
That's helpful
straight like
because it
comics
tells
like
us
I'm
that
working
there's a
on now,
problem with the
and
distal
then
convoluted
I'll be
tubule in
releasing
collecting
something in
them, which
February
have
that's like
protein channels
fully
called
augmented
aquaporin
as well.
that only
And
reabsorb
so
water.
yeah, so I have
These channels
I have
are
a I have a
activated
nice
by
little mix of
antidiuretic hormone,
everything.
which is secreted from the pituitary
For the most
gland.
part, have some toys, some plushies that will also be like AR
So
enabled
free
soon as
water
well.
clearance,
So you know,
CH2O,
it's all sort of
is
coming together.
calculated by this equation. So free water clearance
Oh,
is
crap.
the urine flow rate, V, minus the osmolar clearance, COSM. And conversely, urine flow rate is the free water clearance plus the osmolar clearance. We can find COSM by multiplying urine osmolarity, UOSM, with the urine flow rate, V, and dividing by plasma osmolarity, POSM. This is similar to the equation we used to find the clearance of a solute, except now we include all the solutes. Let's work through a simple problem to make this concrete. Let's say that a woman has a urine flow rate of 1.5 milliliters per minute, a urine osmolarity of 130 milliosmoles per liter, and a plasma osmolarity of 280 milliosmoles per liter. What would be her free water clearance? Plugging in the numbers, we get that the urine flow rate is 1.5 milliliters per minute, and the COSM can be calculated by multiplying 130 milliosmoles per liter by 1.5 milliliters per minute, and divided by 280 milliosmoles per liter, which gives us 0.7 milliliters per minute, which means 0.7 milliliters of plasma is cleared of all the solutes found in the urine every minute by the kidneys. To calculate the free water clearance, we take 1.5 milliliters per minute minus 0.7 milliliters per minute, which equals 0.8 milliliters per minute, which means 0.8 milliliters of plasma is cleared of solute-free water per minute. If the free water clearance
Oh, thank
value
you.
is
I
positive,
appreciate it.
that means that free water
Definitely,
is being secreted
you know,
and the
definitely
urine
check
is
it out.
hyperosmolar compared to plasma.
I'm working on this
Meaning
one.
the urine
This is
less
like
concentrated.
volume
This can
4.
happen if we drink a lot
So
of
I'm almost
water
done with
and our
volume
body
4, and
wants
then
to
I'll
get
be
rid of
working on
something.
volume
Or if the kidneys
5
are not responding to
to
ADH.
finish off like season
If the
5 to
value
finish
is
off
negative,
like
this means
the
that
big
free
volume that
water
I
is
have.
being
So,
reabsorbed
you know,
and the
definitely
urine
appreciate
is
it.
hyperosmolar compared
If
to
you have
plasma,
some time,
meaning
definitely
the
check out
urine
the
is more
store
concentrated.
because I'm
This can
doing a little
happen
holiday
if we're
sale. So,
dehydrated or if we're releasing an
yeah.
inappropriate amount of ADH.
Just trying to create stuff and stay sane and, you know,
All right, as a
survive
quick
out
recap,
in these streets.
renal clearance is the rate at which certain substances are removed from the plasma by the kidneys. By comparing this rate to the clearance rate of inulin, which is freely filtered and not secreted, we can get an idea of if the substance is secreted, reabsorbed, or poorly filtered. Free water, or pure water clearance, can be similarly calculated by getting the rate of urine flow and subtracting the rate of solute clearance to get the rate that pure water is filtered out of the plasma and excreted by the kidney.
Glomerular filtration. Yeah.
The workhorses of the urinary system are the kidneys, which are the twin, bean-shaped organs in your body that clear harmful substances by filtering the blood. It's a bit like a water purification plant that helps to clean the drinking water for a city. Blood filtration happens inside over 1 million nephrons scattered inside each kidney, and each nephron is made up of a renal corpuscle and a renal tubule. So let's zoom in on the renal corpuscle, which is where blood filtration starts. The renal corpuscle is made up of the glomerulus, a tiny bed of capillaries, and the Bowman's capsule surrounding the glomerulus. Between the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule, there's a space, called the Bowman's space. Blood gets to the glomerulus through the afferent arteriole, but interestingly enough, once the blood leaves the glomerulus, it doesn't enter the venules. Instead, the glomerulus funnels the blood into the efferent arterioles, which divide into capillaries a second time. These capillaries are called peritubular capillaries because they're arranged around the renal tubule. Now, the first step in blood filtration happens at the glomerular filtration barrier. The glomerular filtration barrier is made up of 3 layers, and together they separate the blood inside the glomerular capillaries from the fluid in the Bowman's capsule. They work like a sieve, allowing water and some solutes in the plasma, like sodium, to pass into the Bowman's capsule, while keeping red blood cells and plasma proteins in the blood. Starting from the capillary lumen, the first layer of the glomerular filtration barrier is the endothelium, made up of glomerular capillary endothelial cells. These cells have things called fenestrations, which are like pores in the cell themselves, tiny spots where the cytoplasm isn't filled in, so that solutes and proteins can't pass right through. But the fenestrations are so tiny that they block red blood
That looks
cells
pretty
from passing
good.
through.
I am pretty
And
pleased
blood
with how this looks.
minus
So
red
now,
blood cells is called plasma.
time to make
So plasma gets to the second
my
layer of the
borders and
glomerular
panels.
filtration barrier, which is the basement membrane. The basement membrane is a gel-like layer with tiny pores, and this layer prevents plasma proteins from passing through. That's because the pores are too tiny for plasma proteins to slip through, and because the basement membrane has a negative electric charge, which repels the negatively charged plasma proteins. The third layer of the glomerular filtration barrier is the epithelial layer, which is made up of special cells called podocytes that wrap around the basement membrane like the tentacles of an octopus. Between these tentacle-like projections are tiny gaps called filtration slits. This third layer works with the basement membrane to block the passage of plasma proteins. The fluid that manages to get past all 3 of these membranes is called the glomerular filtrate. Now, the volume of fluid that gets through the glomerular filtration barrier is ultimately governed by Starling forces. Starling forces include both hydrostatic pressures, which are fluid pressures, as well as oncotic pressures, which are the pressures based on the amount of protein that's present on either side of the barrier. So let's zoom in and take a closer look at the spaces in question: the capillary blood and the Bowman's space, with the Bowman's capsule on the end there for reference. Now, since there are no proteins in the Bowman's space, there are only 3 Starling forces at play, and these are the hydrostatic pressure of the capillary blood pushing against the endothelium of the barrier, which we will refer to as PGC. Then there's the hydrostatic pressure of the filtrate in the Bowman's space, which we will refer to as PBS, and the oncotic pressure determined by the concentration of proteins in the capillary blood, which we will refer to as PGC. Together, these 3 pressures determine the net ultrafiltration pressure of the glomerulus, which is the difference between the force favouring filtration, which is the hydrostatic pressure in the glomerular capillaries, or PGC, and the 2 forces opposing filtration,
turned out pretty good.
which are the hydrostatic pressure in the Bowman's space, or PBS, plus the oncotic pressure in the glomerular capillaries,
just
or
gotta do
PGC.
The gulps and the sniffs.
So the net ultrafiltration pressure is equal to PGC minus the sum of PBS plus PGC. Now, let's think about the net ultrafiltration pressure at different points along the glomerular capillary. Early on in the capillary, right around when the blood flows in from the efferent arteriole, oncotic pressure is at its lowest, because the capillary is
All
still
these
full of
freaking
fluid,
layers.
and that means that the protein concentration is relatively low. As blood passes through the capillary, fluid is filtered into the Bowman's capsule, so the concentration of proteins in the capillary increases, and, as a consequence, oncotic pressure increases as well. By the end of the capillary, right around where the blood is ready to flow into the efferent arteriole, oncotic pressure reaches a maximum value, and that makes the net ultrafiltration pressure approach 0. This point is called filtration equilibrium, and from this point on, there's no net shift in fluid in either direction, going towards the Bowman's space or going towards the capillary. In other words, once filtration equilibrium is reached, blood is no longer filtered by the glomerulus. Net ultrafiltration pressure directly determines the glomerular filtration rate, which is the total amount of filtrate produced by all the glomeruli in both kidneys in 1 minute. Glomerular filtration rate can be worked out as the net ultrafiltration pressure multiplied by the filtration coefficient, or Kf. Kf indicates how permeable the capillary is to fluid, and it depends on the surface area that's available for fluid filtration, as well as the permeability of the glomeruli. The glomerular capillaries actually have a relatively high filtration coefficient when compared to systemic capillaries, because the glomerular capillaries are all huddled together like a ball, and this increases the total surface area for filtration. And also remember that the glomerular capillaries have fenestrations. The glomerular filtration rate can vary based on changes in any of the three Starling forces. So let's go through them. First, let's look at capillary hydrostatic pressure, which is mainly determined by the resistance of the afferent and efferent arterioles. Now, if there's vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole, this reduces renal blood flow, and in turn, capillary hydrostatic pressure and the glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. If there's vasodilation of the afferent arteriole, there can be the opposite effect: increased renal blood flow, increased capillary hydrostatic pressure, and an increase in glomerular filtration rate. Now, if there's vasoconstriction of the efferent arteriole, that decreases renal blood flow. However, since the increased resistance is after the glomerulus, there's more fluid inside the glomerular capillaries, and that leads to an increased hydrostatic pressure and therefore glomerular filtration rate. If there's vasodilation in the efferent arteriole, that increases renal blood flow. But since the blood encounters less resistance exiting the glomerular capillaries, there's a decrease in hydrostatic pressure, and therefore a decrease in glomerular filtration rate. Second, let's look at oncotic pressure. An increased concentration of proteins will lead to an increased oncotic pressure, and that leads to a decrease in glomerular filtration rate. Conversely, a decreased concentration of plasma proteins has the opposite effect. There's a lower oncotic pressure and an increase in glomerular filtration rate. Thirdly and finally, there's hydrostatic pressure in the Bowman space. Now, if there's a blockage in the urine flow, like a stone that's lodged in the ureter, blocking the drainage of urine, then the backup of urine can cause an increase in hydrostatic pressure opposing filtration. An increase in hydrostatic pressure in the Bowman space leads to a decrease in glomerular filtration rate. And typically, there aren't really any situations that cause a decrease in hydrostatic pressure in the Bowman space. Alright, so let's wrap this up with a quick recap. The glomerular filtration membrane sits between the blood and the Bowman space. The glomerular filtration rate is the amount of blood filtered each minute, and it's determined by three Starling forces. These are capillary hydrostatic pressure, capillary oncotic pressure, and hydrostatic pressure in the Bowman space.
Oh man.
Together, they determine the net total filtration pressure, which is the main determinant of glomerular filtration rate, along with the
how much did the shipping
KF.
come out to be? I'm curious, because it's out in Canada. Oh man. I know it gets really expensive with the shipping. Shipping just be $64? What? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so this is what I would say. Dang, $64 just for shipping. That's crazy. Freaking yeah, shoot me an email. Shoot me an email at Steven@Iltopia, or hit me up or whatever. And we could figure something out to try to get you some stuff to the crib. Yeah. So yeah, just shoot me like an email or like a message on Instagram or whatever, or Facebook, or all that, and we could figure it out. I think this is what I got for. This is what I got for freaking. I don't know if this is my favorite picture. I don't know if this is my favorite page, but it's done. I got it done. So it took me about an hour and a half. I think it takes me about an hour and a half every time to like work on these pages. Maybe I could get better at it. I don't know, but yeah, it takes me about an hour and a half. So I'm gonna stop my recording and I'm going to, post this little picture that I got. Boom. And then call it a day. So yeah. About to head off, but thanks for tapping in. Yeah, just shoot me a message, and we could try to figure out a way to find a way to like offset, get you the books, and then also offset the all the stuff for the shipping and stuff like that, because I don't want you to be paying for the books and then also on top of that paying for shipping. So we could figure something out. So yeah, just hit me up, and try to get you some stuff for the holidays, because that's what it's like being a creator, and I get how it is and everything like that. So hopping off. I appreciate you chilling with me. See ya, and hopefully see you guys back on the next episode. I'll probably do another stream or whatever. Yeah. I still need to get like the address and everything, but like yeah, we could figure that out. So yeah, just hit me up, and we'll figure out a way that works, and kind of just go from there. So other than that, I will catch you guys later. Yeah, pretty pleased with this. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, catch you guys later. So see you.